Thomas lived in Dudley Street and worked at the Albert Street plant as a blank tray maker, as a bright tinner. But I've discovered actually that the Albert Street plant was owned by none other than Joseph Sankey. Now Joseph Sankey and John Lysa were close, I call them friends, or they were business partners, business relations. So he certainly would have become aware of the new Lysett plant here in Newport through that connection, presumably within the plant. And also the plants in Bilston at this stage were beginning to run down, and the opportunity of coming to a new site, a new plant in Newport was obviously very attractive. So in 1909, late 1909, the family moved, the grandparents moved with their children, moved down to Paradise here on the coast in Newport. I discovered that my grandfather was ill with lupus, and we just wondered whether that was another reason why he felt coming to the coast might be sort of beneficial to his health, but that's pure sort of speculation. Anyway, the whole family came. The names to remember: Martha, Thomas and William Harold. So he had 7 children, 4 girls and 3 boys, but Martha, Thomas and William Harold, they're the ones who will develop as the talk goes along. Particularly remember Martha Coombs, because Martha married Sam Berry. They married in Bilston before the rest of the family came down, but from my research it looks very likely that Martha came down with Sam more or less the same time or just after the rest of the Coombs family. But the reason for giving the background is I wanted to present the talk in the light of the survivors as well as the poor old poor Sam. Right, Sam and Martha. Everything was fine in 1911. They'd moved down here. They had a daughter called Hensy. We often wonder where Hensy came from, but now we know it came from obviously Sam's mother, because it's a very strange name. Living in Dewstow Street, not very far from here. Sam had a fine job at Orb, working as a furnaceman, and by the end of 1915 they had 2 more children. So they had Hensy, Ada and Martha. So in fact everything was fine. He was sort of settled in Newport, happily married. I'm sure Newport in those days, you know, compared with the Black Country, was a nice place to live. But blimey, all that was about to change quite dramatically with the outbreak of the war. I won't go into that. You all know what happened. Germany invaded Belgium, and the UK declared war on Germany on the 4th of August, and the lamps will go out all over Europe, as Gray said. But with Kitchener's demands or requests to join up and fight for your country, the Coombs family didn't ignore that wish or that proclamation. My father, William Harold, he joined the 8th Battalion in 1914, entered the theatre of war in France in September, the 5th of September 1915, and eventually finished up in the Forgotten Army in Salonika. So I don't want to refer to him anymore, but simply to say that there's one member of the Coombs family in faraway countries in Macedonia. His brother, Thomas, who I just mentioned, he was a territorial at the time, and he joined the 1st Mons, entered the theatre of war in 1915, in February 1915, and very sadly he was killed in the Battle of Loos, which was only a few months afterwards. He was killed in October 1915. Pardon? October 13th at the Hohenzollern Redoubt.
Lots of 1st Mons, that's right.
Yeah. Incidentally, if you want to ask any questions at any stage, don't hesitate to sort of interrupt me. I don't, you know.
The 8th Southwest Borders had a whole company, didn't they, for Newport Athletic Club within that battalion. Yeah, from the rugby club.
Did they?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And they were in Salonika as well, were they?
Yeah, they were in Gallipoli as well, were they not?
No. these were, the second were in Gallipoli. I'll come to that in a minute. The second was certainly in Gallipoli.
Right.
So, look, Sam Berry also joined. I don't know exactly when he joined, but he certainly entered. He entered the theatre of war on the 26th of the 11th, 15, which was in fact a month after his brother-in-law Thomas had died in the Battle of Loos. He was married. He had 2 or 3 children, depending on the date. And I've always asked this question, why on earth, when you've got a nice family, you're happily married, you're living in a nice place, why on earth would you actually volunteer? There was no conscription at this stage. That was a pure voluntary thing to do with your family. Can't imagine putting your country before your family. But in those days, perhaps people thought a little bit differently to how you would think nowadays. I certainly wouldn't, I can tell you.
Are you happy to work through the presentation and maybe take questions afterwards?
Whenever you like.
Is that
Whenever you like. Not sure I can answer them all, but
I think it disturbs the flow a little bit.
whichever you like. So here they are. There's Sam Berry. That was taken in 1915, I presume, along with my father. Whoop. So Sam joined as a Lance Corporal, but was very shortly promoted afterwards to Corporal. Entered the theatre of war in 2611 and entered in the Balkans. So there he had 2 stripes, so we can only presume that that was taken just before he entered the war, because they look very tidy there, and the photographs I was seeing people in the war, they look a bit bedraggled. So that was definitely taken in 1915. So there we are. Sam has joined up. Now, I want to kind of integrate what I know from the war diaries and what I know from Sam's activities to try to develop what happened during the war. Oh, we've gone back one. Sorry, beg your pardon. So, 2nd Battalion. 2nd Battalion arrived in Gallipoli and fought in the, unfortunately, the sort of disastrous campaign in Gallipoli. But I know from Sam's records that he didn't actually arrive until November. So it was towards the end of the Gallipoli campaign. And on the 11th of January, from the war diary, they withdrew from Gallipoli and headed towards Egypt. And Sam was there, he was in Egypt, I've got the evidence. Then they sailed from Suez, they sailed from Alexandria to Marseille, and arrived in Marseille on the 15th of March. And then they went by train to the Somme region, arriving at Pont-Rémy, or Domat de Pontieux, and they arrived on the 16th to the 18th. And then, shortly afterwards, the 1st of July 1916, they participated in day 1, the first battle of the Somme, and he survived that and went on to fight in the Battle of Albert. And then looking at the diary, gosh, they were moved around, they were here, there and everywhere. They spent a lot of time moving from one place to another. And then on the 26th of June, 17, they moved to the Ypres campaign. And up until the 8th of October, they participated in the 3rd Battle of Ypres. But, as I've mentioned before, not at the actual Passchendaele event, which came a little bit later, because on the 9th of October, bang, back in France. So they did an awful lot of mileage, an awful lot of movement, which surprised me. So, then comes the Battle of Cambrai, the ill-fated Battle of Cambrai, and Sam's direct involvement. Now, how do I know that he was involved in such things? Well, I know from the war diary, but you might say, was he there? Well, I've got a postcard of Sam, dated the 22nd of January 1916, after the evacuation from Gallipoli to Egypt. And here he is writing to his younger sister, and it's quite poignant when you think, he says, just a line to let you know I am quite well, hope you are the same. And it's quite, you know, when you think what they're going through, and he's thinking of his little sister back in the UK. Remember me to Wilf, who's his brother-in-law. So there, I know for a fact that Sam was in Egypt. Then from another postcard that I have, dated the 18th of May 1916, he was in Asher Wood in the Somme, just before the big day on the 1st of July. So that confirms that from the war diary that he was there. And again, he's saying just a few words to let you know I'm quite well and hope that all you are the same. I hope you at home are well. So he's thinking of people at home when, gosh, he's really going through the mill, and he asks for his greetings to be passed on to his mother and dad and his brother. So yes, he was there in May, and therefore you can obviously assume that he was there at the time of the 1st of July, First Battle of the Somme. I've got another postcard, not dated, but Good Friday, so it's an Easter card. And I know therefore that Sam, either on April the 21st of April 16 or 6th of April 17, was still in France, and he was either at Louvaincourt or Saint-Brin or Montier or Arras. Don't know when, but that kind of fits in with exactly where the battalions were on those dates. So I've got no hesitation in believing that when I read the war diary of the 2nd Battalion, that Sam Berry was there. This is something I raised with a few people earlier. I was surprised to find this postcard somewhat later, and here he is with his platoon, I presume, or company. I'm not quite into military terms, but I presume it's a platoon, could be a company. But it's got a UK postage. So in 1917, I didn't know this, he obviously came back to the UK. I was pleased to know that because in 1918 a child was born, a fourth child. So I thought, oh, and I've been in touch with his granddaughter, and we're all sort of quite convinced now that.
You better get your DNA checked.
And we think it was towards the end of 17 by the date of the birth of the fourth child. So here he is, just a line to let you know. I had a label and a letter all right. I don't know what a label is, but anyway, it confirms that he was back in the UK. Now, I don't know whether people came on leave to the UK, whether he was injured. I know in a moment I'll refer to his will, or whether he came back because a child was born. I've no idea, but I'm surprised that people fighting in the horrendous sort of field of war in France could come back to the UK and then, you know, for a short space of time, settle down, like the life over here, and then be sent back. God gracious me. But anyway, that's...
the whole platoon. I mean,
that's a platoon, I presume, is it?
Yes, a platoon. I would imagine it's about 25 people.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
But I mean, you did get home leave. You know,
Right.
That happened. But I wasn't aware that a whole platoon together would go on home leave.
No.
And if they did, they'd all go off to their own homes.
Quite, yeah.
Be there as a group in one place.
But it looks like
strange,
a UK
yeah.
picture
Yeah.
with the barracks. I can't imagine that being built to that
it could be.
in France.
So
But
that's not definitely UK then.
but that,
Yeah.
I can't imagine, if it posted from France, you wouldn't put a UK stamp on. And that's why I'm asking people, I passed the postcard around,
Right. Yeah.
where was this place, Sunderland or Underland or Underland or...
He's on home leave. Why is he not at home?
Well, whether he not, I don't know. It's a mystery, but it's fascinating. But that's certainly, there's Sam certainly with his platoon, and he looks like a distinguished sort of sergeant major there with his, giving me that impression anyway. So there we are. Now let's move on to the Battle of Cambrai. It's dark. I'm very familiar with the first day of the Somme, but 6:20, 20th of November, it's absolutely pitch dark. Dawn is beginning to break. It's silent. And then suddenly, bang. And unlike the Somme, where there was about 2 days of artillery fire, bombardment, there was none whatsoever at Cambrai. There was silence, and then suddenly at 6:20, all hell let loose. Over 1,000 guns, the artillery was bombarding the enemy, who probably were asleep at that time. Tremendous noise, which took the enemy totally by surprise. Shortly afterwards, they unleashed 400 tanks. Battle of Cambrai was the first battle where so many tanks were used. They were used prior to that in very small numbers, but at Cambrai they were used in vast numbers. And within a short space of time, got to check my notes here, by about 7:30 in the morning, they'd broken through the Hindenburg line. Germans called it the Seefriedstellung. But that was a huge defensive line, about 40, 50 kilometers long, very long anyway, but they'd broken through it, not at one point in time because of the distance, but between about 7:30 and 9:30, all the divisions had broken through. Riebenkorps and Havrincourt, they fell very shortly, again, before, should we say, lunchtime or before 12 o'clock. And there was a massive push forward, again, in the direction of Cambrai, to take Marcoing and Masnieres, and then reach this particular challenge, which was the Saint-Quentin Canal. But at that particular crossing, that's where poor old Sam copped it. Just to show the photograph, that's one of the tanks that was used. Slightly out of sequence, I have to say that there were over 400 tanks that took part in this, but by the end of day one, only 50% of them were still operational because they'd been damaged by fire, by breakages, by the tracks breaking and all sorts of things. Now, we come to the sad part. I mentioned that the 29th Division set off behind the other. Sam, we know, is in the 29th Division with the 2nd Battalion. Very, very quickly, they passed the Hindenburg line and they reached the canal, and they were making efforts to cross the Saint-Quentin Canal in order to take Marcoing and Masnieres. But in doing so, as they were approaching, they then actually faced, and this is the quote I've taken actually, they faced heavy fire from the enemy, who at this stage now would be obviously gathering their thoughts and preparing their resistance they were caught by surprise early on, but now they were beginning to respond. And at the canal, the battalion was stopped by rifle and machine gun fire from houses on the far bank, and they suffered heavy casualties, and there were a large number of people who were wounded and killed from the war diary at that point. And that's where poor Sam was one of the casualties at that particular time. He was wounded, at that point not actually killed, but he was then taken to one of the clearing stations just down the road from there. And because of the bravery and gallantry at the crossing, he was recommended for a military medal, and that's the authentic document from the officer in charge, colonel, major, whatever they call them, Captain Rakes, who had recommended Sam to receive the military medal. And this is the recommendation, that's a transcript of what is there. So, near Marcoing on the 20th of November, for conspicuous courage and gallantry at the canal crossing. When the company came under machine gun fire, Corporal Berry led his men forward with great determination and courage, himself leading across the river. He was wounded on reaching the canal bank. This is another sad aspect here. Captain Pearson repeatedly told me what excellent work this NCO had done during the day, but there was little time to take details because Captain Pearson was missing the following day, so I was unable to get the details. And Captain Pearson, on the 21st, was also killed. So sadly, we don't have any more information about what Sam did, because unfortunately the man who initially recommended him was also killed. The whole thing is really saddened by death and sort of destruction. So we know Sam received the military medal because this is the document here which confirms that he received it. And on the right hand side, just to show you, that's what the military medal looks like. We cannot trace his own. We talked to various people, I gave it to so-and-so, and so-and-so said, well, I gave it to so-and-so. We have not got the military medal, we've not got the penny, we've not got the big sort of certificate, but which is a pity, but we know he obviously had it, and it's a long time ago, but That's what the military medal was like. Battle of Cambrai. So Sam has died, and after the enormous successes, I think everybody believed that these successes were beyond expectations. It was really successful, and these various places were taken, but later it all changed. The enemy resistance and counter attack was successful, and the successes of day one were, and I suppose many battles were like that. They were pushed back. They were pushed back all the way to the Flecker Ridge, and Cambrai, which was the target, was never taken in this campaign. In the time from the 20th of November to the 7th of December, when it all came to an end and the battle was over, there were 45,000 casualties. Of course, some people might say, compared with the Somme and other battles, that's not very many, but good God, it's still a lot in a short space of time. 45,000 casualties, of which 50% were killed or missing, and that included poor old Sam Berry. So he had a military medal posthumously, but he lost his life. And just by the way, from human casualties, the Germans, they also suffered enormous casualties as well, and that's not to be forgotten either. So what was a great success, I've taken these are not my words, I've taken them from different documents. It was either a failure or the withdrawal, or as one document I read stated, it was a public embarrassment. But I think at the end of the day, they were about a mile or two farther forward, and then after that it was just attrition and the usual trench warfare. Moving on, I was in France in 2015, and I visited the grave of Sam Berry in Rocany-Equancourt, and that cemetery was built on the clearing station that's where he died. I'm pretty sure of that. Not absolutely sure, but pretty sure that's where the cemetery was. And actually, because of the state of the war at the time and the fronts moving back and forth, there were about 200 German casualties buried in the same cemetery, which sort of shows you that it's not just the British, it's the Germans, and all these people, poor people, sort of died in these activities. Now, I've also come across Sam's will. And if you remember the dates, 1917, I just wonder whether it was the 19th of September 1917 when he was back in the UK. This is pure supposition. And this is when his will was made out to, you remember her name? Martha. So in the event of my death, I give the whole of my property, which wasn't very much in those days, and my effects to my wife, Martha Berry. And they'd moved actually to Cromwell Road from Dewster Street in that point in time. So that might have been, he might have written that when he was back in the UK, but look, it was only a very short, only 2 months before he actually died, so you wonder, why did he write it then? Was he thinking, gosh, you know, this is getting worse, am I going to survive? But then he had his wife and children at home. Better leave that with you. I then discovered the register of the soldier's effects, and I think this is particularly sort of upsetting in a way. He died of his wounds. He died fighting for his country, but he left a widow who by 1918 had 4 children, and he received a pittance, £8, 12 shillings and a penny, and his mother received 12 quid. I think it's quite appalling when we hear all these, it's almost the romance of fighting for your country, and at the end of the day, you lose your life, and you're talked about, but where it really matters, you're not given.
Is that a lump sum?
Yeah, that's a lump sum.
Yeah.
I tried to find, I spoke to Susie about this. I haven't been able to find that, but Susie tells me the war pension was 13 shillings per week, 13 shillings.
She possibly would have got more because
The children.
and he's a corporal.
You're right.
isn't he? So
Yeah.
she would have got more money more than a private. Yeah.
And there would be children's
even that doesn't seem to be right, actually. If you lose your life, you know, whether you're a corporal or as an officer, it's irrelevant, you know. You really should...
Still the same now.
It's exactly... Is it? Well, it's wrong. It shouldn't be.
Well, in any field of work, well, if you've got a sort of... Well,
Yeah.
we are on pension schemes, but,
Yeah.
you know, your lump sum, if you die in service, is dependent on your salary at
But
the time.
It's...
But I mean, she would have got probably extra allowance to speak to children
She
as
had
well.
5
Mm.
shillings
Yeah.
for the first one.
5 shillings. Brilliant.
4 shillings something for the second, and then it went down.
Yeah.
Down the line, yeah.
So, Sam had died. He was awarded the military medal. There he is. There's his wife. That was taken in the early 20s, so I understand. Left with 3 children, expecting another who was born in 1918. There's the 8 shillings, £8, 12 shillings and a penny. His mother received £12. Her brother had been killed in the Battle of Loos, and her father was very ill, and he died in 1922 with his illness. So the whole thing is quite sad, and it actually reflects not just his death, but how it impacted on a family who'd moved from the Black Country, the dirty Black Country, down to Newport on the coast, expecting a new life, a new steelworks, a new job, new children, and then suddenly you finish up on the War Memorial. And that's where we started. That's how we talked about. How were we talking about Sam Berry? Here he is on the War Memorial at Orb, along with his brother, Tom Coombs. Thanks for listening. That's my presentation. But I wanted to get across. It's not just his death. The impact on the whole family is quite horrendous, really. There we go.
That was absolutely fantastic.